Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
Welcome back, everybody. This might be a slightly hard pill for some of us to swallow, but here it is. The secret to change in your life, moving your life forward, is partly taking responsibility for it. What does that look like? We're going to talk about that today. And if you are feeling somewhat stuck, maybe stressed out, maybe kind of burned out, maybe you need to take responsibility. Let's talk with her about it. She's the woman that gives people courage to shine. And that's the name of her book that she is very well known for. Directions for Wellness is her practice. Sara Regester is back with us. And back from vacation too. How are you?
I'm good. I'm all recharged after my vacation.
So lots to talk about here. Taking responsibility, sometimes that's a challenge for us to even ponder, especially when life hasn't gone in the direction that we've wanted it to go in. Maybe it was at the hands of somebody else who changed the direction of our life. Maybe we weren't thinking of it going in that direction. How do you grip that? How do you embrace taking responsibility for a lot of things?
Well, I was reflecting on it after some of our conversations we've had of where people, as physical beings, we are in physical bodies, having a physical lifetime. And there's something about the attitude of just sitting back and waiting for life to get better, or to go into blame where we think it's not our fault, somebody else is responsible. And I just was reflecting on, for the real key changes I've made in my life, it's where I took responsibility to either change that behavior, learn more about it, have that conversation. Like there's an element here that not everyone understands how powerful it is to actually take responsibility for yourself, your thoughts, your actions, your words, everything, your happiness.
It's almost as if we're wired to go into the victim mentality when something happens. So we don't take responsibility. It's just the why me, or how could they do that? And why do we, and I'm not judging anybody, minimizing anything, any situation, but why do we gravitate toward the victim mentality?
I think it's a matter of maturity as a human being.
Ooh, that one hurt.
I know, but it has something to do with having enough, I would say, conscious awareness or awareness that when I take an action, I need to stand accountable for the consequences. So if I'm abusing my body, if I'm like swirling around in my stress, if I'm complacent about something I should change, but I'm just sort of sitting in the devil I know, that's where we stew in our soup, and where, actually having that internal conversation about what can I do about this? How can I make a change? What's one step I can take is very different than the internal conversation of poor me. When is it going to get better? Why is it always me? I never have enough, or that internal conversation that is going to be disempowering. And again, you said the word, being stuck in self-pity and blame. It's someone else's fault. It's always happening to me versus how can I be part of the solution in my own life?
Let's say that life didn't go the way you wanted it to. Let's say that somebody did something to you, something pretty major, and, it changed your life. Obviously, there's always, when it involves somebody else, which almost every situation does, there's a level of responsibility that you need to shoulder. And it could be an 80-20 split, whatever they did, that 80% horrible over there. Yeah, it's something to do with it. 20, 10%, whatever it might be. How do you, and I get what you're saying, to look at the positive side of it, where there's a lesson to be learned. That's why it happened for you and not to you. But how do you stomach that when it's skewed? Or, gotta say this, let's say it was a random situation. You're just walking down the street, something happened, changed your life. how do you take, when we say take responsibility, even in a situation like that?
What I know is sometimes that situation is actually the wake-up call that is enough stimulus to make us recognize, oh, if I would have done this differently, or if I would have paid more attention, or if I would have said something. So that it's not always that the things that happen to us might actually be the catalyst that gives us enough awareness to recognize, I need to change how I'm looking at this, or I need to change how I'm dealing with this. And so I'm thinking of an example. Many, many years ago, I kept having this kind of intuitive hit about I'd moved into a new place, and I had this feeling like, oh, I really should make sure the door's locked, or I really should change that light bulb out in front. And I kind of heard the little knocks of what I should be doing and kind of a little tug on the inside, but I wasn't really listening. And lo and behold, I got robbed, and it was 100% preventable. And it was a horrible thing. Anyone who's been robbed, you lose sentimental things,
Your
all
sense
the
of
things
safety. Your sense
oh
of
my
safety.
gosh, yes. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, yes. And that is, I could say it's a regret of how I had the intuitive sense if I would have paid attention, I would have taken steps for prevention. Instead, it was a painful lesson of awareness of paying attention to my space, securing, my home, and how I do things differently now, because it's not being complacent, but more like being more awake, aware, and alert from that negative thing that happened. It actually was an important kind of change I made about my own self-awareness in my space and safety.
So there's a wake up for many. And I've never been in that situation, but I want to ride on the intuition thing here. Been in situations where I knew deep down inside this is not the way it should go. And then, things happen later on. And I'll never forget in one major life-changing situation, I was talking to a friend who is very intuitive. And I said, "We're going to happen." He said, "You knew it was going to happen." I'm like, "You knew it was going to happen." Yeah, you're right. And so I bring that up because your intuition told you, lock the door. And you're like, no, we're good. Do you find that in many of these situations, our intuition is telling us you have this compass inside of you that's giving you the answer, but we ignore it. I did, you did. Yes, we have to take responsibility, but maybe like go back a little bit, one step back, and look at our intuition. We've skimmed that a little bit here, but it seems like that's kind of important.
You want to pay attention to that because, in a sense, it's part of our naturalness is to pay attention to reality danger or any kind of safety or lack of balance issues that come up. But and what's also important is going forward. Do I encode that as a pain story that I keep thinking, oh, they stole this, I lost that, if only I would have, versus like, okay, that was a wake-up call. I'm not doing that again.
Oh, I got you.
Like get that bottom line boundary in there, or that, doing it differently next time. So you're not like Groundhog Day going through the same thing until you finally get that lesson that wakes you up enough to pay attention.
And maybe that was a wake-up that you needed to have. And maybe it's connected to or was connected to something else, not just locking your door. I'm talking about making sure you're safe. You just brought back a memory. I was 22, was involved in a fight, major fight, me and two other friends late at night. I sensed this is not going the way it should go. And I just walked away from it. And this was a crowd of other males, come to realize that some of them were wrestling champions in our area. So they were big. And what was my wake up? I went to go to my car, which was brand new at the time, and turned my head. And I'm like, I'm just getting out of here. Done with, this, whatever they're saying. And as I go to open the door, I sensed that somebody was in back of me, turned my head, got clocked, and there it all, the brawl began and damage to me and my car. My intuition told me, as I look back, I should have been more aware of it. And guess, like you, I say, I'll never do that again. Radar's up. Not like obsessed, but if I'm walking in a challenging part of town, radar's up. I'm just looking around, just taking it all in, and because you need to, and you learn. So
Exactly.
should have taken responsibility. I take responsibility for that for sure.
Yeah, and here's where you go with the next step is what I would call erasing personal history. In erasing personal history, we're not saying that painful event didn't happen, but if I can recognize what I learned from it or how it's part of my internal wisdom now of how I will be more aware in my space, for example, or in other ways, anything, whether it's an emotional, mental, physical kind of challenge that you meet in your life, where the true kind of healing comes is when you can integrate, gosh, that's what I learned from that peak event. So rather than it going back there and pulling yourself into the pain of the story and the woe is me and how could I and why didn't I and the woulda shouldas, instead it's like, okay, I'm not going there again. I got that. I don't need to have that repeat. Next time I'm going to be wiser. And so that's what's important about our past is can we integrate our past painful or peak experiences into something that I can take in as how I gained wisdom, how I grew up as a person, how I matured as a human being, or am I going to keep letting it kind of poke at me all the time, pulling me back to the past, ruminating and getting that pity story kind of perpetuating? And that will really throw us out of balance if we always kind of go back to the past and then we rinse and repeat and do it again till we get it.
What I'm getting from you a lot today, but in particular, is to embrace our past, to embrace those moments that were rather unpleasant, but you take responsibility as you need to, and make it a part of you, and it was part of your growth. And many of us, like you say, well, how did you say that before? Erase. You said erase.
Erasing personal history.
Which,
like each of us have our stories, our mythology, whether we were little kids and it happened or last week. It's like that check-in of, what did I really learn from that? What did I gain from that experience that was either torture or emotionally hard or could even be a health problem? How you overcome things is when you take responsibility for what is your part. So when I was complacent about the warning signs for my home, I had no one to blame about getting robbed except my own kind of asleep at the wheel attitude rather than paying attention and taking the steps to keep my home safe. Same thing with your health. It starts out as a little whisper, a little knock, a little subtle thing. And the more you ignore it or you pretend it's not there or you keep pushing through, it'll just get worse and more painful or a worse health problem or a bigger problem that you'll have to keep dealing with until it, finally gets your attention and you want to just be able to deal with things without them having to stop you in your tracks, and
in
having a
your
huge
robbery
sleep crisis.
situation, did you know? Like deep down inside, did you know this is not a good situation? It'll be fine. But did you hear it in your mind?
I heard it, I felt it, and I kept feeling like there was something off. And I even had a neighbor, I had just moved in, so I just had this neighbor say, "Hey, you really should fix that light bulb out in front. It's burned out, and you want to keep yourself safe." And then even when I woke up, and the front door was standing wide open, I still thought, did I forget to lock the house last night? Did the wind blow the door open? And it's almost like it's worse than being naive. I was like asleep. That's all I can say. Completely ignorant of the signs and not paying attention. And where else do we do that in our lives where the truth is there, but we don't want to see it or we don't want to deal with it, whether it could be it could be a situation at work, it could be a situation in your family, it could be a situation maybe where you're walking on eggshells to avoid a confrontation rather than just kind of embracing what's there. And so that's the piece about that self-responsibility is recognizing not what am I going to do, but more like how am I going to deal with this? How can I navigate this? Or how can I learn from this? That piece of self-responsibility is a real human being opportunity to grow versus being stuck or staying where you are or in your comfort zone. And so I could see the application to your money, your relationships, your health, your job, your family. That piece, that one piece is like a big human being opportunity.
Do you always have to take responsibility?
I think it's important to recognize what is mine to do. Yeah, is it my scope? Is it within my lane? Is this about me? Sometimes you're not going to take responsibility because you recognize really that's their problem. They're working through that. My interfering is not that in a certain situation, maybe it is not my responsibility, but it would depend on what the circumstances are. If we're jumping in and rescuing everyone or taking over or trying to be the superhero, saving people from their own mistakes, that's not what I'm responsible for.
Well, in our lives, let's say, and I get you, everybody has free will. If somebody's doing their own thing and maybe you've given them advice, advise them, whatever it might be, and they still, now it's on them. But when it involves your life, it's whatever that may be, whatever it might be. Do you feel that there's always going to be, and I'm just wondering if there is always going to be some responsibility involved, some way, some shape and form, if it involves you?
If it involves me, yes, but I need to ask myself, what is mine to do
Hmm.
versus where am I overstepping, micromanaging, rescuing, doing too much? Maybe it's my responsibility just to hold space for someone and let them figure out what is their responsibility rather than me jumping in. So I
Sure.
think without a real concrete example, it's hard to kind of
I get
pin
you.
down. But yeah,
Yeah.
I think there's a discernment for sure. Because some of us are very overgive and take on other people's problems. That's not it.
Oh, yeah. And I'm not even referring to that. Like if it's,
Mhm.
even if it's somebody close to you and they're doing this, whatever this is, not necessarily your responsibility, but then I try to look at things through every angle. You know, is it your responsibility to guide them? If you're a parent, I guess it is. Past that, it's their choice, assuming they're of a certain age, to do whatever that they have free will. So you can't say, oh, they're doing this, my fault. Well, I can't
Mhm.
take responsibility for that. You guided them, and then now it's on them. Um, so I'm trying to look at this where, there is always a role of some responsibility if you're connected to it. And it might be a tiny, tiny
Yeah.
responsibility.
Well, if you're a parent and you're a helicopter parent, you're
Oh,
not going to teach your children the consequences of their choices.
yeah, yeah.
And so you're not letting the kids take responsibility, you're taking it on for them. And we do see parenting like that in this era where parents are so concerned about the well-being of their children and they love them so dearly. They just want to get in there and not let the kids learn how to learn from their mistakes.
That's a whole
You
other
know,
podcast.
whole another podcast.
And
I just thought there
usually,
might be parents out there.
oh my gosh, and yeah, I
Yeah,
get it. Usually in those situations, there's more going on. There's
yeah.
guilt as a parent, and I get it. And there's a lot of other things happening there if you're helicoptering your kids.
Hmm.
What else can you share about taking responsibility?
Well, I saw it as the key to healing in so many ways. When I really reflected on my own healing and how there was a point in my life when I was so impacted by my stress, I was like really, really ill with many problems that were significant. And a lot of them were kind of like autoimmune flavor and very severe with medication and treatments and this kind of thing, like asthma and food allergies, latex allergies, cognitive issues, leaky gut. I mean, it was a long list, right? Till I finally figured it out. And it wasn't until fairly recently, like I understood at the time when I changed pattern, when I engaged with how could I do my life differently? How could I be a successful professional without wiping myself out? But at the end of the day, what it all distilled down to, with all the changes I made, it was how I took responsibility for my own health, for have the discipline and follow through to change the patterns, whether it's how I'm thinking, how I'm eating, how I'm doing my lifestyle. But another example of where I saw this as a cardiac nurse in my heart patients, you have a wake-up call like a heart attack or open heart surgery. And those individuals, when I witnessed how they healed, they changed their diet. They looked at how they were doing stress. They stopped smoking. They started exercising. They made all these changes. As as I say, that heart attack or heart diagnosis was the catalyst that gave them enough internal motivation to step up and say, I've got to do something. I've got to change. That if the spouse was there with the diet book and the spouse was saying, we're going to sign you up for this and sign you up for that, it's not going to be as effective as when the individual says, okay, what can I do for myself to heal, to get well, to get back in balance? That's where I was really thinking of that flavor of taking responsibility in terms of our health. It's not always easy to make these changes, but what's the internal motivation that will help me support myself to step into self-responsibility to engage with change or whatever I need to do for myself?
Well, taking responsibility now, we're writing on health. In the things that you mentioned, we had signs. We already knew. It kind of goes back to what we said before, that you kind of knew, my situations, yours, even with your health, your body was saying, hello, something's got to change over here because I'm not going to be working the way you really want me to. And you probably had a sign, from your body, and you need to take responsibility.
Yeah. And what's interesting is my doctors assured me I'd be on medication for the rest of my life for asthma and the other things. And it was like, I was like, what? Forever? It was like, and it wasn't that I thought they were wrong, but there was something internally inside of me that was not okay with, I don't want to be an asthma person forever. I don't want that identity. And that was kind of what motivated me to start exploring, how to get underneath those symptoms and how to address, what would help me be healthier. And today I'm not having any medication for asthma or any sign of it. So.
Wow. Well,
yeah,
I guess you took responsibility.
Yeah.
I guess.
But it was a multi-pronged approach. I always say that. It wasn't one
sure.
thing. It's all the things you do.
Yeah.
Change.
I'm glad we talked about this today because it's one of those tough things where, we want to push it on somebody else, but ultimately, I heard this a long time ago and it rings true all the time. When you point the finger at somebody else, what's going on? You have three fingers pointing back at you. Mm-hmm. Best way to find you. How do we do that?
Yes. Well, there's my book that talks about a lot of this. It's on Amazon, Apple Books, on Audible. It's The Courage to Shine, How to Feel Confident Outside Your Comfort Zone. That's one way to find me and my message. Also, my website is directions4wellness.com. I'm happy to have a conversation with anyone about their stress to see how I could help them.
Appreciate talking with you. You run deep in terms of your medical background and what you do now and all of this. And I appreciate your transparency too and honesty about your life, because I feel we all have a story. We all learn from each other's stories, and always great having you on here.
Yeah. And it really is about learning how to walk your talk, being responsible for yourself.
Appreciate it, Sara. Thanks. We'll catch up soon.
Thank you.
We'll be right back.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
For nearly 2,000 severely injured veterans, everyday life has become filled with barriers.
Day-to-day simple tasks can become pretty daunting.
I have to carry my chair up 2 flights of steps or have somebody do it for me.
What scares me the most is just the falling.
When I'm struggling with my house, I think, to have that one great barrier just knocked down, it's crucial.
Home for Our Troops is a wonderful nonprofit that builds a
Mortgage-free, fully adaptive, handicap-accessible house. And there's no catch.
It'll be our very first home that we've ever owned.
This is a game changer.
This is where your life begins again.
We need you to join us in completing this important mission. Please visit hfotusa.org and help build homes and rebuild lives.
Because of you, everything's going to be okay.